world of fear.
Tonight's story is called Voices Beneath the Old Oak Tree. Turn down the lights and let's begin. I haven't been back to Derbyshire in 6 years. I don't think I ever will go back, to be honest. Not after what happened at the cottage. You know, people always talk about silence in the countryside. They call it peaceful. They tell you that moving out to the sticks will help you clear your head, that the quiet is good for the soul. But they're wrong. The countryside is never really silent. There is always something. The wind in the dry stone walls, the shifting of the earth, the settling of old timber. And sometimes, if you listen too closely, you hear things that shouldn't be there. Things that sound like nature until you realize they're speaking to you. I'm telling you this now because I need to get it out of my head. I'm a rational man. I don't believe in ghosts, or goblins, or fairy tales. But I know what I heard. And I know what I saw beneath that old oak tree. It started when I bought a place just outside a village called Eam. You might know it, the Plague Village. But my cottage was a good few miles out, isolated, tucked away at the bottom of a deep, wooded valley. It was a fixer-upper, as the estate agents say. 18th century stone, slate roof, and a garden that had been left to run wild for decades. The property was bordered by dense woodland, mostly ash and beech, but dominating the bottom of the garden, right at the edge of the property line, was this colossal oak tree. You've never seen a tree like this. It was ancient. Its trunk was so wide you'd need 4 or 5 men linking arms to circle it. The bark wasn't brown. It was black, slick with moss and age, knotted like arthritic knuckles. It cast a shadow that seemed to swallow the light, even on a sunny day. The branches didn't reach up to the sky like a normal tree. They drooped low, heavy, and twisted, scraping the ground like fingers searching for something in the grass. That it was majestic, in a grim sort of way. It was the selling point for me. I fancied myself a bit of a landscape gardener, thought I could clear the brambles and make a feature of it. That I moved in late October. The timing wasn't great. The days were getting shorter, the drizzle was constant, and the fog rarely lifted from the valley floor. It was just me and my dog, Mildred. She's a border terrier, fearless little thing usually. Or she was. The first week was mostly unpacking and stripping wallpaper. Just normal, mundane work. But the atmosphere in that valley was heavy. It felt watchful. The first odd thing wasn't a sound. It was the smell. That I'd be out in the garden, clearing away the dead nettles near the base of the oak, and I'd catch this whiff of something sweet. Not flowery sweet. It was sickly, like meat that's been left out in the sun, masked by heavy perfume. It would hit me for a second, making me gag, and then the wind would shift, and it would be gone, replaced by the smell of wet earth and rain. That I blamed it on a dead badger or a fox nearby. I looked around the roots, poking with my spade, but found nothing. Then, there was the behavior of the birds. That I'd put up feeders, peanuts, fat balls, the works. The garden was full of them near the house. Robins, tits, finches. But I noticed something strange. They never went near the oak tree. Not once. They wouldn't land on its branches. If a gust of wind blew a sparrow too close, it would frantically flap to correct itself, veering away as if it had hit an invisible wall. The tree stood in a circle of silence. No birds, no squirrels, just damp earth and those thick, black roots snaking into the ground. The real trouble started about 3 weeks in. Mildred, my dog, began to refuse to go out at night. Usually, she'd be scratching at the back door for her final wee before bed. But suddenly, she wouldn't cross the threshold. I'd open the door, and she'd just stand there, hackles raised, low growl rumbling in her throat, staring into the blackness of the garden. Specifically, towards the bottom of the garden. That I remember one Tuesday night vividly. It was dead calm. No wind. The fog was thick, pressing against the window panes. I stepped out to force Mildred to do her business, torch in hand. The beam cut through the mist, illuminating the wet grass. I swept the light across the garden, the shed, the fence, and then the tree. It looked massive in the fog, a looming, dark shape. And that's when I heard it first. I thought it was dry leaves skittering over pavement. A sort of rhythmic, dry scratching sound. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I held my breath, The sound changed. It became softer, wetter. It sounded like suction, like a boot being pulled out of deep mud, over and over again. Slop, slop, slop. Hello? I called out, feeling foolish. Is anyone there? Silence. Then, a whisper. It was so faint, I thought it was my blood rushing in my ears. It didn't come from the woods behind the fence. It came from the base of the tree. It sounded like a woman's voice, but broken, distorted, like a tape recording being played too slow. Help? My stomach dropped. It was undeniable. A clear word. I shone the torch directly at the trunk. Who's there? Are you hurt? I took a step forward. The rational part of my brain said someone had fallen, maybe a hiker who trespassed and tripped over a root. Cold. The voice wheezed. So cold. I ran back inside, grabbed my heavy coat and the big mag light, and rushed down the garden path. Mildred stayed at the door, whining, scratching at the wood to get back in. I reached the tree. The air was freezing here, unnaturally so, colder than up by the house. The smell of rotting meat was overpowering now, thick enough to taste. I swept the light over the roots. Massive, gnarled things, thick as a man's thigh, diving into the earth. And there, between two of the largest roots, was a hole. It looked like a fox den, but bigger. The earth around it was churned up, raw and black. Is someone down there? I shouted, shining the light into the hole. The beam didn't hit the bottom. It just vanished into the dark. And then silence. Absolute, heavy silence. No whispering, no movement. Just the smell of decay and the cold radiating from that hole. I convinced myself it was a prank. Kids from the village. Or maybe a badger making noises that sounded human. Animals make strange sounds, right? I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. A few days later, I went down to the local pub, the Miner's Arms. I needed to get out of the house. I got chatting to an old bloke at the bar, Arthur. His name was. One of those locals who looks like he's part of the furniture. We made small talk and I mentioned where I was living. Arthur went quiet. He put his pint down very carefully. The old Miller place, he said. Down in the dip. That's the one, I said. He looked at me, his eyes watery and serious. And the tree? You kept the tree? The big oak? Yeah. It's a bit overgrown, but you don't cut that tree, Arthur interrupted, his voice low. And you don't listen to it. I laughed nervously. What do you mean, listen to it? Arthur leaned in close. He smelled of tobacco and stale beer. My grandfather used to say that tree sits on a thin place. He said the roots don't stop in the soil. They go down deep, into places they shouldn't. It drinks, son. It's been drinking for hundreds of years. Drinking what? I asked, feeling a chill despite the warmth of the fire. Whatever falls close enough, he whispered. Don't let it mimic you. If you hear your own voice, you run. I left the pub feeling unsettled. It was just village superstition. Country bumpkin nonsense to scare the townie. That's what I told myself. But the activity got worse. The whispering wasn't just at night anymore. I'd hear it during the day. I'd be in the kitchen making tea, and I'd hear a mumbling coming from the garden. Indistinct conversations, like a radio left on in another room. Mildred became a nervous wreck. She started peeing in the house because she refused to go out. Then came the night the mimicry started. I was in the lounge, reading. It was windy outside, a gale blowing through the valley. The old house was creaking. Suddenly, I heard a voice, clear as day, just outside the window. Let me in. I froze. It wasn't a whisper. It was a man's voice. It was my voice. I don't mean it sounded like me. It was identical. The same pitch, the same accent, the same inflection. Let me in, it's cold out here. My own voice said from the darkness. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I walked to the window and peered out through the curtains. Nothing but blackness and the swaying silhouette of the oak tree in the distance. Why are you locking me out? My voice asked again. But this time, the tone shifted. It sounded angry, guttural. Open the door. I want to show you. I grabbed the phone to call the police, thinking someone had recorded me. But the line was dead. No dial tone. Just a wet, static hissing sound. Then, the scratching started on the back door. Not knuckles rapping. It was scratching. Like long, hard nails dragging down the wood. I backed away into the hallway. Mildred was under the stairs, shaking, her paws over her eyes. Come down to the roots. My voice called out, but now it was layered. It sounded like my voice overlaid with a dozen others. An old woman, a crying child, a growling dog, all speaking in unison to form the words. We are all down here. It's warm. Come down. I knew I couldn't stay in the house. The panic was rising in my throat like bile. I grabbed my car keys and Mildred's lead. I was going to make a run for the car. Parked out front, I burst out the front door, dragging the dog. The wind hit me like a physical blow. The rain was torrential. I fumbled with the car door, but I dropped the keys in the mud. Damn it! I fell to my knees, scrabbling in the wet gravel. That's when the ground beneath me shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a localized vibration, a thrumming that traveled up through my knees. I looked up. The oak tree. Even from the front drive, I could see it looming over the roof of the house. And it was moving, not swaying in the wind. The branches were moving with intent. They were uncoiling. The thick, black limbs were twisting like snakes, reaching over the roof of the cottage towards me. But the worst part was the sound. The ground around the house erupted with noise. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was a choir of agony. Help us. Mother. Cold. Hungry. Feed. Feed. Thousands of voices screaming up from the soil. I found the keys. I jammed them into the lock. But then I heard a snap. A sound like a gunshot point. One of the massive roots had burst through the tarmac of the driveway, just feet from me. It was pulsing. It looked less like wood and more like a muscular, black vein. It whipped through the air, seeking, blind and violent. Mildred barked, a sharp, terrified sound, and snapped at the root. The root lashed out. It wrapped around Mildred. No! I screamed. I lunged for her, grabbing her collar. The root was cold, slimy, and hard as iron. It pulled, dragging her towards the back of the house, towards the main trunk. The strength of it was impossible. I held on, my boots sliding in the mud. Mildred! She yelped, her eyes wide with terror. Then, from the darkness of the garden, the voices converged into a laugh. A deep, wet, wooded laugh. Mine. The root gave a violent yank. The collar snapped in my hand. I watched, helpless, as my dog was dragged into the darkness of the back garden. She didn't even have time to bark again. There was just the sound of rustling leaves, a wet squelch, and then she was gone. I didn't go after her. I'm ashamed to say it, but I didn't. The fear was primal. It overrode everything. I jumped into the car, started the engine, and reversed out of that driveway so fast I nearly put the car in the ditch. As the headlights swept across the house one last time, I saw the oak tree. It seemed to have grown. It was taller, broader, and hanging from the lower branches, swaying in the gale. I saw shapes, lumps, wrapped in moss and roots. They looked like cocoons. And one of them was small, dog-sized. I drove until I hit the motorway. I didn't stop until I reached a service station near Sheffield. I sat in the car, shaking, covered in mud, clutching a broken dog collar. I never went back to the cottage. I paid a clearance firm to go in and get my things. I told them not to go into the garden. They told me later that the house was fine, but the smell was unbearable. Like a sewer had backed up. I sold the house at a massive loss to a property developer who wanted to knock it down and build modern eco-homes. I thought that was the end of it. I live in a city now, Birmingham, miles away from ancient woods and deep valleys. But last week, I got a letter. It was from the developer I sold the land to, or rather, his solicitor. Apparently, there had been an accident during the demolition. They tried to dig up the oak tree. The excavator operator claimed the ground bled when they cut the roots. He walked off the job. But that's not what keeps me up at night. It's what I hear when it's quiet. I live in a second-floor flat. There are no trees nearby. But sometimes, late at night when the traffic dies down, I hear scratching on my floorboards, coming from below. And just last night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a sound from the drain in my bathroom sink. It was a small, familiar bark. And then, a voice. My voice. We're still hungry. So, if you're ever in the Derbyshire Dales, and you see an old cottage with a black oak tree that the birds refuse to fly near, don't stop. Don't look at it. And for God's sake, don't listen. Because once the roots know your voice, they never let you go.